From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Kaylee Lyons.
Donald Trump brings his economic pitch directly to Wall Street, ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange after being named Times Person of the Year. The president-elect's advisors now telling Bloomberg they're considering doubling the SALT deduction to $20,000 as part of plans to revamp the tax code.
Congressman French Hill of Arkansas chosen as the next chair of the House Financial Services Committee after the House cleared must-pass defense legislation last night. We'll talk with one member who objected to the bill, Congressman Adam Smith of Washington, ranking member on the Armed Services Committee.
And we'll bring you a conversation with the foreign minister of Latvia on chances for a peace deal in Ukraine and the Trump administration's approach to NATO. Thanks for being with us on the Thursday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kaylee, Donald Trump made a lot of news today as he arrived in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, there, of course, after being named Time Person of the Year, as you mentioned, Joe. And no surprise, given his audience was quite literally Wall Street, taking it as an opportunity to talk about the economy and lower taxes.
Yeah, let's hear from the president-elect earlier today on Wall Street.
The economy, I believe, is going to be very strong. We do have to solve some problems. We have wars going on that we didn't have. We have a lot of things happening that we didn't have that would have never happened. They would have never happened, but now they have happened, and I want to get them solved.
Joining us now for more are Bloomberg's Mario Parker and Bloomberg Government's Kate Ackley here with us around the table in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Mario, we know that Donald Trump knows his audience when it comes to Wall Street, and he was taking this opportunity not only to herald the fact that he was selected as Time Person of the Year, but to basically say, I intend to keep my promises to you.
Yes, absolutely. We saw him immediately hit on taxes, right, saying that he wanted to lower the corporate tax rate from 21% to 15%, something that he mentioned to us, I should note, in our interview with him over the summer for Bloomberg Business Week. He knows his audience well. He was happy. You could see the energy that he had around him. Donald Trump is, in some ways, an encapsulation of the 1980s. He loves hardcover magazines, glossy pics, right. The fact that he gets to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. We are all well aware of the stock exchange being a barometer that he uses for his economic success.
So to your point, the optics here are not an accident. We remember him shooting episodes of The Apprentice at the New York Stock Exchange. This is an interesting impression to make before he takes office. What does he want us to remember?
Well, he wants us to remember, first and foremost, that he won the election on the grounds of the economy, right? He feels as though that he won the election in the Time magazine piece. You heard him talk about grocery prices, the real economy, how the economy meets the rubber of the economy meets the road, right? But also, again, just going back to the fact that he looks at Wall Street, he looks at the New York Stock Exchange, he looks at what the markets are doing to measure his success. When it goes up, he has everything to do with it, even before the election, in his mind, right? When it goes down, it means something is wrong with the world.
Well, he also looks not just at the New York Stock Exchange, but the people of New York who have a bit of an issue with the current cap on the state and local tax deduction. Bloomberg reported today, through Trump's economic advisors, that they're looking at doubling that SALT cap to $20,000. This, of course, is something Congress will likely have to vote on. And last month on Balance of Power, we spoke with a Republican congressman from New York, Mike Lawler, about SALT. This is what he told us.
I've been very clear. I will not support a tax bill that does not lift the cap on SALT. Obviously, through reconciliation and a small majority, my vote, along with many of my colleagues from New York, New Jersey, California, are going to be critical to pass a tax bill. If nothing passes, the cap on SALT completely expires. So it's certainly within, it's important for everybody to recognize the importance of entering into good faith negotiations here.
Kate, add the voice of another congressman from New York, Nick LaLota, says, for years I've said I wouldn't vote for a multi-issue tax bill that didn't include a reasonable increase in the SALT deduction. $20,000 is not reasonable. Are they going to have to go higher if they want the requisite Republican votes?
Well, this is going to be part of that huge debate next year, this big 2025, I think we've called it Taxapalooza, and, the tax Super Bowl. And this is going to be a big one, a big part of the debate. And like Congressman Lawler was making the point, this is going to be extremely narrow margins. There are going to be times when the Republicans are down, a few votes because people are going into the Trump administration. So, it's going to be a nail biter, and this will definitely be at the top of the list of things that they're wrangling over.
Important headline that came from the House today, from within the Republican conference. French Hill, the Republican from Arkansas, who's been on this program and many others on Bloomberg a lot of times, won the gavel. He's going to be the chair of the committee. You cover lobbyists for a living. Will his office's number now be the most popular on K Street?
One of them, for sure. I mean, that's a panel that is of extreme importance to Wall Street and, all your viewers and people who watch the markets. It oversees the financial regulators. This was a big win for French Hill. All four of the contenders, there were four members of Congress running for this gavel. And actually going into this, Andy Barr from Kentucky was seen as a real serious front runner. He had the backing of the number 2 House Republican, Steve Scalise, who was they're close anyway. He was considered to be a front runner because of that, and also he had superior fundraising, which that's part of the game. So, but French Hill, our sources are saying that had a very good, strong presentation in this steering committee meeting, had a lot of ideas, talked about how he was close with some of these incoming Trump cabinet officials. So we'll be doing a little bit more reporting, trying to figure out how he had the edge, but industry certainly is comfortable with this pick.
Just quickly, because we've talked about a lot of Republicans here, Mario, I do want to ask you about the Democrats still in the White House. Joe Biden today announcing 39 pardons and 1,500 almost commutations of sentences. He suggested more could be coming. Are we going to get those preemptive pardons?
The signs are pointing in that direction. We don't know, right? If we don't know anything about this White House, the one thing we know is that it's very reactive, right? He took so much heat over the last couple of weeks for the pardoning of his son, even after he had said that he wasn't going to do that. Activists, parts of the Democratic base have been pressuring him to go really big on a lot of this clemency. So we'll see whether or not the preemptive pardons will be coming down the pipe.
We've got a few more weeks to play with here. Bloomberg's Mario Parker and Bloomberg Government's Kate Ackley. Thank you both for great reporting. Coming up, our conversation with Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. He's next on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. The annual Defense Authorization Bill passed the House last night despite some Democratic opposition to language banning health care for transgender children of military members. One of those opposed to the ban's inclusion in this bill was the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, Congressman Adam Smith of Washington. We spoke with him a bit earlier, started by asking him if that language would become law.
It looks like it will. The bill passed out of the House almost 2-1. I think it was 281 to 141. I believe the Senate will move forward and the president will sign it. And look, there is a lot of good in this bill. Particularly pay increases for enlisted service members and other benefits aimed at helping service members and their families make it financially. So, and plus, there's a lot in the bill to enhance our partnerships and alliances in the world, to get after some of the production challenges that we have. But that one provision targeting health care for trans youth, it shouldn't have been in the bill. You know, frankly, the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee didn't think it had to be in the bill, but Speaker Johnson thought it did for purely partisan wedge issue reasons. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, I think the bill will make it through the process.
Well, so what you're describing, sir, the idea that there could be a lot of good in a piece of legislation, but still include culture-oriented issues or language that many find issue with. Is this what the 119th Congress is going to look like with Republicans in control of both chambers?
It's worth worrying about, yes. Look, and Congress, by and large, we're always trying to get a little bit of a partisan political advantage. That's part of it. But we balance that with getting things done. And one of the things I love about having been on the Armed Services Committee for 28 years is this committee was one of those committees that focused on the getting things done part. And we have in the past had efforts to try to put more partisan issues into the bill, frankly, from both Democrats and Republicans. And when one side or the other says, yeah, we can't do this, we reject it and we get back to work. So, yeah, the fact that this went into the NDAA is concerning about what's going to happen in legislation going forward. And there are a lot of things coming up next year. Appropriations bills, debt ceiling. Yeah.
This wasn't just about trans, though, right? The chair of the committee, the Republican leader of your committee, Mike Rogers, didn't want that language in there either. The problem was bringing cultural issues of any sort into the NDAA. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, the members of the committee, Hask and Sask, and look, frankly, I don't know how Mike Rogers feels about the specific language. He just knew that it didn't belong in the defense bill.
Well, so as we consider not just this piece of legislation, but defense issues moving forward, as you'll be ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, do you believe that you will be able to work in a proactive way with Pete Hegseth if he is indeed confirmed to be the next Secretary of Defense?
I don't know. I do know that I will continue to be able to work in a proactive way with Mike Rogers, who's going to be the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and Roger Wicker, who's going to be the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Very bipartisan in Congress. As for how Mr. Hegseth is going to run the Department of Defense, there is cause for concern about his willingness to be policy-focused and work in a bipartisan manner, but we really don't know yet.
You do have unique perspective on some of the other potential members of Donald Trump's national security team, assuming people get the roles that they have been tapped for. Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, Congressman Mike Waltz. When you put some of these other names together, Congressman, what kind of confidence do you have in this team, and specifically when it comes to finishing the job in Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm very concerned. Certainly Hegseth is the biggest concern. I mean, his management of the few small nonprofit agencies that he's been in charge of or worked with over the course of the last decade is alarming. We've seen the allegations substantiated by many people who work there, that he was drunk, that he didn't spend the money well, that he was unconcerned about the management of those organizations, and certainly we saw the result. They nosedived both organizations when he was working at them. So there's considerable cause for concern there. Mike Waltz is a very serious, intelligent person. Mike can be a little aggressive, in my view, in terms of how we deal with people in the world from my time serving with him on the committee. But he's a smart, reasonable guy who we can work with. And to your question, then I'll get to Tulsi Gabbard if we have time. Look, President Trump opposed sending more money to help Ukraine defend itself. We're not going to get to peace with Putin unless we show strength, which is ironic because that's the big Donald Trump message. I will be strong and therefore we will get to peace. And yet on Ukraine, he's showing weakness by saying that he didn't want us to send more money to help Ukraine defend itself. Ukraine needs those resources to defend itself, and they need long-term security commitments to force Putin to the bargaining table. And then, let's go get a negotiated peace. This war has been an unbelievably costly conflict, certainly for Ukraine. Let's get to peace, but you don't get to peace if you walk away from helping Ukraine defend itself.
I get the sense, Congressman, that you do have some thoughts regarding Tulsi Gabbard, who I would remind everyone used to be a Democratic member of the House of Representatives like yourself. Can she be trusted with the nation's intelligence secrets?
Yeah, she served on the Armed Services Committee when I was the chair. And look, I have a decent working relationship with Tulsi. And, I mean, we've had many conversations. They've been sensible and fine. She didn't do that much on the committee that I noticed. But certainly, you know, what she's had to say about Assad in Syria, what she's had to say about Putin, the concern about her just, you know, spouting Republican talking points on Ukraine, you know, and also the lack of any background and experience in intelligent matters, which is a complicated world. As the top Democrat on the Armed Services Committee, I'm let into that world. I was on the Intel Committee for one term. There's complicated issues there, and you have to know how to handle them and know who to work with. And I think there is concern as to whether or not people will trust Tulsi Gabbard with that lack of experience and some of those questionable things that she has said publicly about, you know, some of her allies and friends, as to whether or not she's going to be able to do the job.
So you don't believe, as her worst critics say, that she's a Russian asset, Congressman? You would have known, I suspect, as chairman of that committee.
No. Yeah, well, actually, I don't think I would have known. I don't actually have a list in my head of all Russian assets. They try to keep those things secret as much as possible, particularly from Americans. So, no, I wouldn't necessarily have known, but I don't have any specific evidence of that either. It is a little weird, some of the things that Tulsi said that seemed to perfectly parrot, you know, what Putin was saying about Ukraine and the conflict. No, but I'm not going to make an allegation like that without any specific evidence pointing to it.
Congressman, finally, before we let you go, you, of course, represent a district in which there is Boeing facilities. And I do wonder if you have reaction to the announcement today of the current chair of the FAA, Michael Whitaker, saying that he will be resigning on January 20th. We've seen many agency heads do this, but he still had years left in his term. Is it a mistake for him to be leaving now? And what kind of individual do you hope replaces him?
Yeah, well, I don't know the details behind that. A similar thing swirled around FBI Director Wray's decision to step down. I think it was yesterday. And look, a lot of the people in these positions are concerned about how Donald Trump is going to run these agencies. Is he going to put personal loyalty over the interests of the American people and the responsibilities of the job at FBI and FAA? I say ding, 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 ding. Yes, that's a big yes. From everything Donald Trump has said, it seems like he is going to do that. And I think there's a lot of people in these agencies that have a dilemma now. Do they stick around and try to make the best of it? Or do they resign in principle and say, look, I don't believe in the way that he's going to run things? And also, I should say, I don't know why the FAA director left. So until we know more about that. But certainly we've also had problems with the FAA in terms of their ability to adequately monitor Boeing planes, as has been documented. And certainly there's a lot of fault for Boeing and how that played out. But the regulatory agency didn't seem to be up to the job either. So we got to resolve those issues, all against the backdrop of the unique way that Donald Trump apparently intends to run the United States government.
You can find our conversation with Democratic Congressman Adam Smith, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, online or on the terminal. And still ahead, producer price inflation unexpectedly accelerates, and you can blame eggs. We'll have the details and what it means for the Fed's rate decision next week, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. U.S. wholesale inflation unexpectedly accelerated in November on a surge in egg prices, while other categories suggested a muted increase in the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation gauge. This all ahead of the Fed's rate decision next week. So joining us now for more is Bloomberg's Michael McKee. So, Mike, obviously a pickup in inflation is not something that the markets or certainly the Fed is looking for, but will it make a real difference on what happens next Wednesday?
It's not going to make a difference. Actually, if you go under the hood of the numbers, it will probably push the Fed more towards cutting rates. The headline rate went up, but as you mentioned, it was all about eggs, a 56% rise in the cost of eggs due to avian flu. And that's not something raising or lowering interest rates is going to change one way or another. As you also mentioned, the Fed-friendly things, the things that go into the PCE, which is what the Fed uses as its 2% target, came in lower than expected on the whole. And so economists today were marking down their forecast for inflation in the PCE, which is what the Fed wants to see. So things are kind of going their way, and it does look like we'll be locked in for a Fed rate cut on Thursday.
It's interesting, Michael, whenever we get statements from the White House on days like these, when the inflation reports come out, CPI, PPI, the word typically is there's yet more work to be done. A White House that's been very reluctant to claim victory in the fight over inflation. It's time for a new White House. What kind of news releases should the Trump administration be prepared to write?
Well, the kind that they'll write and the kind they should write are probably going to be two different things. But what you want to see is a continued strength in the labor market, and you want to see continued low inflation. Now, we don't know what's going to happen yet with tariffs, and we don't know what's going to happen with deportations. So there are two big areas that could affect what the new administration ends up having to talk about when they get their first reports. Ironically, what'll be interesting is this could be, if we get the PCE, it's very close to 2% now. If it were to fall to that, then the Fed basically would have achieved a soft landing in the very last PCE report released before Joe Biden leaves office.
Pretty incredible. As we consider, though, the kind of data that the Trump administration will be looking at and how they message around it, Mike, it does point me to the big take that was out on the Bloomberg terminal and online today that actually looks at this new Department of Government Efficiency and how they might cut funding for the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which provides us all this wonderful economic data that we look at and you break for us every morning. How concerning should this be?
It should be very concerning, and not just because the Trump administration is coming in. The government has been cutting back on funding on an inflation-adjusted basis to the statistical agencies, the BLS, as you mentioned, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and the Census Bureau, for many years now, and it's getting harder and harder for them to do their jobs. At the same time, people stop answering the phones, so they stop filling out the surveys that the BLS and the BEA need to figure out what's going on in the economy. And the combination is making our data much more difficult to trust. We have some releases like the JOLTS numbers. They come out with something like a 24% response rate. And that's very hard to scientifically adjust to make it valid. So there is a problem ahead. The concern with the Trump administration is that the president in his previous term did not like those agencies because they weren't always reporting good news for him. And so he might target them, especially when he needs to find a whole lot of money to continue his tax cuts. So there's concern about what could happen, but there's also a lot of concern about where we are right now.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us on Balance of Power. Bloomberg's Michael McKee on PPI Day. Coming up, we turn our attention abroad. A conversation with Latvia's foreign minister about how her country is preparing for the next Trump administration. It's next on Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We do have to solve some problems. We have wars going on that we didn't have. We have a lot of things happening that we didn't have that would have never happened. They would have never happened, but now they have happened. And I want to get them solved. We have to get them solved because ultimately the power of weaponry today is the biggest threat we have, in my opinion.
President-elect Donald Trump speaking today before ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange while celebrating being named Times Person of the Year. And in his interview with the publication, he weighed in on the war in Ukraine, suggesting he would use support for the country as leverage to negotiate an end to the war with Russia, saying, quote, "I want to reach an agreement, and the only way you're going to reach an agreement is not to abandon." Joining us now for more on the war and its potential endgame is Latvia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Baiba Braže, who is here with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Clearly, the president-elect views this conflict as a stage in which there needs to be some kind of negotiated outcome. Does Latvia think we're there yet?
So we fully support what President said, that abandoning the friends and allies is not what should happen. And America needs friends and allies as much as every country in the world, because America is a symbol of democracy and freedom. Also for us, Latvia is 106 years old. We were occupied by the Soviets. And every single day we believed in freedom and liberty, and U.S. was the leading light. And very much through the U.S. policy, we regained the independence, which seemed impossible. So today we have to remember that things that seem impossible are possible. So clearly standing strong for Ukraine, providing support to Ukraine, ensuring that it's strong on the military battle in the military field is one way to bring peace. And I think that is the main message we take from President-elect's words. And that is a policy we have. We have provided about 1% of GDP for Ukraine. We will continue doing that. Military, humanitarian, financial, political. Ukraine is fighting for the freedom and liberty of all of us. It's not just words, it's actually deeds.
When it comes to military hardware, there's been a debate in Washington about the way Ukraine is using some of the weapons that the U.S. is providing, and in fact, which weapons to provide. And there were questions asked of Donald Trump in that interview about specifically the use of offensive, longer-range missiles against Russia. He says, I disagree vehemently with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia. We're just escalating this war. What's your view on that?
There are different sort of weapons that can be discussed. Mm-hmm. Currently, what Ukraine gets is ATACMS with a limited use in the Russian territory. We think that actually providing Ukraine with long-range weapons that would enable Ukraine to take out particular military targets, like where Russian planes take off, mm-hmm. Staging areas of the troops, logistics hubs, fuel hubs, and so on and so forth, would bring peace faster, because it would deny Russia the possibility to attack and flatten Ukrainian cities and take territory. So that would be equalizing the battlefield a little bit.
Well, as we discuss this notion of peace, which obviously is the hope here, mm-hmm. that has to be maintained. And theoretically, there needs to be some kind of security presence in order to maintain that peace. Would Latvia participate in it, or who should be charged with maintaining that security?
We currently, I think, have to concentrate really on making Ukraine strong. So that requires both capabilities, military capabilities. That also requires political unity, very strong messaging. So peace through strength, that President-elect has said is his policy, is totally that we support. Mm-hmm. Currently, we don't see that Russia is aiming at peace. Russia's policy is war. Everything that Russia stands for, whether in politics, in its military strategy, but also tactics, in economy, religion, media, private sector, it's all geared towards war. And ultimate objectives that they have said is taking down Ukraine from the face of Earth, from the map. Whether we can allow that, how can we support that as democratic countries, as leaders of freedom in the world? It will enable others. So let's stick to what we have said is important to us.
To Kayleigh's point, once peace is brought to Ukraine, there's been a conversation about what comes next. Poland and France have talked about contributing to a peacekeeping force in Europe.
When peace is brought to Russia,
yes.
I think that's how we bring peace to Russia, because it's Russia's policies that is war. Ukraine has said very clearly, Ukraine is not aggressor. Ukraine is defending. So Ukraine has said that they have a peace plan.
Would a residual force not help to maintain peace in Ukraine after a peace deal, to keep Russia out?
I think it's totally premature to currently sort of speculate how, what, where. There are various conversations ongoing, because obviously we all want peace. Nobody wants war. It's Russia that wants war. But to get to peace, there has to be strength on the battlefield. There has to be very, very clear understanding how we enable Ukraine to be strong also militarily in terms of its own defense capabilities. So to be strong producer of defense stuff, to be able to resupply itself. And then, of course, if at some moment there is a ceasefire or there is some agreement on where the war stops, then it's important to have both political arrangements in place. So does Ukraine belong to NATO? Whether Ukraine, because Ukraine wants to join NATO, and it's a free choice of any country in Europe. That's in accordance with the Washington Treaty. And if yes, then on what terms? If Ukraine is not member of NATO, what does it mean for Euro-Atlantic security? How to ensure that Ukraine is able to self-defend, whether there are security guarantees, what those security guarantees are. So there's a lot of elements in all that, but we are not there yet.
Well, and your point is well taken, Minister, that it's hard to predict the future, and the future is not here yet. I would like to ask you, though, about some events that just recently happened and how they may shape this conflict going forward. The ousting of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, who has now taken refuge in Russia, has raised questions about Russia's ability to continue to operate its military bases there. Bloomberg has reported today that there perhaps is an agreement in the works between Russia and the rebel group that has taken over, at least transitionally, to maintain the operation. How do you see Assad's downfall as potentially having an impact on the way Russia can conduct itself going forward?
I think it's a message to anyone associating with Russia that sooner or later there is a downfall. We saw that with Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, in 2014. We saw it with Shor in Moldova, a pro-Russian oligarch who stole about €1 billion from Moldovan people. We have seen it with Snowden. We have seen it with quite a number of people. So that happened also to Al-Assad, and that's logical, because prompting up dictatorships doesn't work.
But has it weakened this particular dictator, Vladimir Putin?
It clearly showed that his protection not always works, or it can work for a short while, but not for long. And it has also weakened Iran's influence in the region, quite clearly. So there will be a different setup. The important part about Syria is that there is a peaceful transition of power, that that transition is managed, that there is no terrorist threat coming from that country to the neighboring countries or other countries. So meaning that no ISIS-associated forces are in power. No other terrorist associated groups are in power. But also that it's a governed territory and that it has justice elements, that it has tolerance, that it's a territory, a state for all the various minority religious groups in the country. It's not going to be easy. We need to see some economic development there. So there are lots of countries that have stakes in a successful outcome. What success is going to be, I think, again, depends how Syrians define it. But I think we all have stakes to see that it turns to the better.
It's good to have you back in Washington. Thanks for paying us a
Thank
visit.
you so much.
Absolutely. Baiba Braže, Latvia's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, as always. Coming up, Donald Trump is named Time's Person of the Year for the second time. Rang the bell at the NYSE this morning, and we'll take a closer look at his interview with Time with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Well, thank you very much. This is an honor, a tremendous honor. I brought some of our compatriots along with us. They're going to do a beautiful job for you for the next 4 years. And it's really been something very special. And I have to say, Time Magazine getting this honor for the second time, I think I like it better this time, actually.
Donald Trump this morning, just before ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange, talking about, yes, being named Time Magazine's Person of the Year. Is it still a magazine? Person of the Year for the second time. Joining us, our political panel. Sarah Chamberlain is here, the president, CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership, Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Adam Hodge, managing director at Bully Pulpit International. Great to have you both back. Adam, I've been asking Republicans all day about the optics here and the importance of this venue. As a Democrat, What do you make of this? That is the last place Joe Biden probably would have staged an event just before moving into the White House.
Well, let's say Donald Trump and Joe Biden have distinctly different approaches to their policy and how they go about their PR. Trump is famous for having the covers of him all over Mar-a-Lago, and so it's no surprise that he would do an event taking a bit of credit for being Man of the Year. Let's not forget that when Barack Obama was reelected, he also was seen as Time Magazine of the Year. George W. Bush also Time Magazine of the Year.
But the stock exchange,
the stock exchange, well, that's Trump's. I mean, that's playing right. That's in his wheelhouse, right? That's where he thinks his home base is. I think the question is, does he actually earn the title in the next year? Can he get the things that he wants to get done to earn the recognition of being Man of the Year? No question, he's dominated our politics for the last decade, right? That is undeniable. But can he get immigration reform done? Is he going to deport U.S. citizens? Is he going to actually get tax reform done? All those key questions. Well, can he earn the magazine?
Well, let's focus on tax reform, because he spent a lot of time talking about that at the NYSE today. Not just that he wants to get a lower corporate tax rate, which we knew, but Bloomberg reporting today that his economic advisors are looking at doubling the SALT deduction, or the cap on it, rather, to $20,000. Is that an amount that's going to be enough to satisfy, say, New York Republicans who want to see this thing lifted entirely?
So all the New York and the California Republicans are members of the Republican Main Street Partnership, and they can live with that number. They're also the majority makers, so he needs to make them happy. I mean, we're very tight majority in the House, and he needs the California, New York members. So we're really excited about 20,000. It's what we wanted. So, and I really do think we are going to get a tax bill done this year.
Fascinating. Yeah, a tax bill done. What will be the sequence? That's the big question right now. Do you bite off everything at the start, do the border, 2017 tax cuts, or will you have to spread this out, maybe two reconciliation bills over the course of the year?
Probably two. I know they're already starting to talk about that. A lot of the members of the Republican Main Street Partnership would like to see just one and go back to regular order. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
But you probably are looking at two. But I think you're going to see immigration right out of the box.
Will Main Street have a stand on that, or is that up to each member?
It's up to each member on immigration. Yeah.
I think the one thing about the SALT, it's going to be one of the biggest parts of the fight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The question for me is, can you also find a little bit of sugar for some of those budget hawks to stomach that bill? I mean, it's $1.2 trillion over a decade if you lift the cap entirely. 20,000 obviously is a bit more workable, but you got it on top of all the promises that were made on the campaign trail, and the taxes on tips, Social Security, reducing the corporate rate even further. That's a big paycheck. That's a big check they're going to have to find a way to square, and the math may not math here.
So we'll probably lose some of the Republicans on this, but I think you're going to gain some of the Democrats, especially in New York, New Jersey, and California.
Well, fair enough. We know Chuck Schumer has been really excited about SALT for a while now. I also, speaking of Democrats, want to point out that a Democratic Senator, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, was the first Democrat to meet today with the Defense Secretary nominee, Pete Hegseth. This is what Fetterman said afterward.
We had a conversation, and that's part of the process. And that's the thing. I'm going to follow the process. I'm going to listen to what my colleagues on the other side continue to say and how they evaluate. And that's just part of the process.
We've been hearing a lot about process from those colleagues he was referencing on the other side as well. Sarah, is Hegseth going to get through?
I think he's actually going to. I think Senator Joni Ernst is really going to be the key person. She seems to have kind of come around a little bit, but she's supporting the process. We'll see how he does in his hearings.
Weigh in on Hegseth if you want. That comment from Senator Fetterman says a lot about the political universe right now that is Pennsylvania, doesn't it? He's very concerned about where he is right now rhetorically for when he runs again in a state that could be leaning right.
I mean, look, I think that John Fetterman, I take him at his word. He's going to follow the process. I don't think he'll ultimately vote for Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense because, quite frankly, Pete Hegseth is not qualified to be Secretary of Defense. I mean, he's never run anything the size of the Pentagon, let alone a small business. So I think there's real key questions. Does he have the experience and judgment to actually be the Secretary of Defense? But we know, I think Donald Trump didn't pick him because he thinks he has the experience to do the job. It's because he's going to do what he wants him to do.
All right, Adam Hodge and Sarah Chamberlain are sticking with us as we turn next to the new chair of the House Financial Services Committee, Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. We'll discuss that next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I've worked very hard over the last few months to talk about my vision for the committee, my ability to be ready day one to implement President Trump and House Republicans' financial services priorities and regulatory rollback, using budget reconciliation, making community banking great again by both legislative and regulatory changes, countering China. So I've talked about my experience. I've talked about why I believe I'm the best candidate based on that management experience, that ready-to-go vision I have for the committee, and the work I've done here in the House.
Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas making his pitch for chair of the House Financial Services Committee yesterday on Bloomberg. And now it's official. He has won the gavel and will lead the panel in the 119th Congress. The congressman just releasing a statement that says, in part, I am humbled that my colleagues have placed their trust in me to lead the Financial Services Committee as their next chairman. Back with us now for thoughts, our political panel, Sarah Chamberlain and Adam Hodge. So, Sarah, this was a hot contest. There were 4 members in the running for this gavel. How did he come out on top?
He had a great pitch. So 3 of the 4 are members of the Republican Main Street Partnership. So we really had to stay neutral. And a lot of the steering committee members are members of Main Street. So we really have laid low. But he's a great person. I know he does a lot here at Bloomberg. He had a wonderful pitch, I understand. Community banking is very important to a lot of the members, kind of try and pull it back. You know, it's still hard to get loans where a community bank knows the people in their communities. It's a little bit easier to get them through a community bank. So that pitch went over well. He's going to work very closely with the chairman of Ways and Means. So, I mean, he's a great pick. He's just a wonderful man and a good choice for the country.
His background is important here. Obviously, yes, the pitch was compelling. But as a Democrat, what does it mean for you to have a community banker at the head of this panel?
Well, I mean, I think French Hill has a pretty good record of working across the aisle. And I think he and Maxine Waters, there will obviously be moments where they blow up because the Democrats and Republicans will argue about where the direction of regulation should go in this country, on crypto, on community banking, on a whole bunch of other FSOC for sure. I think he has that community banking experience is valuable. And the question is, can they actually find areas of bipartisan agreement? I think he's proven to be a pretty easy person to work with. He's not a firebrand. He's not someone who's out to just score points for the sake of the cameras, even on Bloomberg. So I think he's really someone who the Democrats can work with. But ultimately, it's going to come down to what Speaker Johnson and Donald Trump want to do. And that will be the test. Can he actually find a way to find some middle ground there?
Yeah.
Well, I'm also wondering not just what Speaker Johnson and Donald Trump want to do when we actually get to the next Congress, but what they want to do with this Congress to set them up for the next one, because we have a funding deadline here in just 8 days, Sarah. We know it'll be a continuing resolution, but what else is going to be attached, and what's the holdup?
They're trying not to get a lot of things attached to it. They're trying to keep it as clean as possible to get it through until late February to early March, just to keep the government funded. I think you're going to see Farm Bill and everything get kicked into next year as we move forward.
Disaster relief funding has been a sticking point. How close do we get to that number that the White House is asking for, almost $100 billion?
I mean, I think the unfortunate piece is that the Ukraine funding will not unlikely be a part of the final package. Yeah. And I think it's, they could use extra assistance. The disaster assistance, I think they got to find a way to get it. I mean, these communities in North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, devastated. And they need the extra funding to recover. It should not be a partisan issue. I think they did miss an opportunity to kick the can down the road even further into the year. A short-term CR, to have to deal with that on top of tax reform, on top of the border, on top of nominations. That's a lot to ask Congress. Doesn't have a great track record of getting stuff done in a timely fashion. To do it early in the new year. I mean, if I was the incoming administration, I would want more time. But they decided they're going to do this short-term CR. Best of luck.
They actually didn't want more time. The administration is very happy with it, February to early March. It's because it becomes their priorities after that.
Well, and you're listing that list. We got a debt ceiling to lift, too.
Yeah,
this is just making me kind of dread early 2025, to be honest.
No one's talking shutdown now, but they are when it comes to March, right? That could be a different vibe.
It won't shut down.
No?
No. I think we've learned our lesson from
predictions
shutdowns.
this far out. Let's write this down.
Even with the very, very narrow majority we're going to be talking about at this point in the year, because the special elections to replace members joining the administration won't have happened yet.
The hope is we can work with some of the Democrats. We'll cross over and vote with the Republicans. Shutdowns, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, are going to be a thing of the past because they really don't save any money for the economy. I mean, the people get laid off and then they get them back to work and then they get their full pay.
Sure.
It actually costs the government a lot of money.
It also makes the country look like we don't have it together.
Right. So no shutdown in March.
I don't. I mean, shutting down the government is a terrible idea. We should find a way to find bipartisan compromise to get a budget. That's how a country should function in the 21st century.
If only our panel were running Capitol Hill. Sarah Chamberlain and Adam Hodge, thanks so much for the insights. Great analysis and a smart panel. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter for more on all the stories we've been talking about. Of course, you can find it on the terminal and online.
And you can find us back here tomorrow for the Friday edition. The week is almost over. We'll have more on Bloomberg TV and radio.